Helen sat by her window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, but instead of feeling peace, she felt a quiet weight, a guilt she couldn't quite name. Did I do enough? Was I good enough? Sound familiar? Guilt has a sneaky way of lingering long after the moment has passed. But here's the truth. Life after 70 isn't meant to be lived under the shadow of what ifs. Today, we'll uncover 15 powerful lessons to help you let go of guilt and embrace the freedom you deserve. Let's begin with the first one. 1. Let go of the should-have syndrome. Helen often found herself staring at old photo albums, smiling at memories but haunted by whispers of, I should have done more. She'd think about trips she never took, hobbies she never pursued, and words she never said. The should-haves crept in quietly, turning beautiful reflections into tangled knots of regret. This invisible weight is something many of us carry, the belief that life had a perfect script we somehow missed. But here's the truth. There's no right timeline, no universal checklist we were meant to complete. Life isn't about perfection. It's about presence. When those should-have thoughts pop up, pause and reframe them. Instead of thinking, I should have traveled more, shift to, I created a life filled with meaningful connections right where I was. Focus on what you did, the lessons you learned, the love you gave, the strength you showed. Helen started practicing this daily. Whenever guilt crept in, she'd write down one thing she was proud of from her past, no matter how small. Over time, her notebook filled with reminders that her life wasn't lacking. It was rich with experiences she had simply overlooked. Letting go of should-haves frees you from the illusion of a perfect past. It allows you to honor your journey, imperfections and all, and see your life not through the lens of what's missing, but through the beauty of what's been lived. 2. Release the guilt of prioritizing yourself. Helen had spent decades putting others first, raising children, caring for aging parents, supporting friends through thick and thin. But when she finally had time to herself, a strange guilt settled in. She'd sit with a cup of tea and a good book, only to hear a nagging voice whisper, shouldn't you be doing something more productive? Sound familiar? Many women, especially in their later years, struggle with the idea that self-care is selfish. But here's the truth. Taking care of yourself isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. You can't pour from an empty cup. And you don't need to justify your rest, joy, or peace to anyone, not even to yourself. Start small. Schedule time for something that brings you pure joy, a morning walk, painting, gardening, or simply sitting quietly. When guilt creeps in, remind yourself, I deserve this because my well-being matters too. Helen created a joy list, a collection of simple things that made her feel alive. She committed to doing one thing from the list each day, even if it was just 10 minutes of listening to her favorite song. At first, the guilt lingered, but over time it faded, replaced by a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in years. Releasing the guilt of prioritizing yourself leads to deeper self-acceptance. It reminds you that your worth isn't tied to how much you do for others. It's inherent, unchanging, and deserving of care, just as you are. 3. Stop apologizing for being yourself. Helen was the queen of apologies. Sorry for talking too much. Sorry if I'm being a bother. Sorry I can't make it. She apologized for things that didn't even require an apology. Her opinions, her needs, her very existence in certain spaces. It wasn't about politeness. It was about shrinking herself to fit into what she thought others expected. But one day during lunch with a friend, she apologized for sharing a story about her childhood. Her friend paused, smiled gently, and said, Helen, why are you sorry for being you? That question stuck with her. Why was she sorry? Notice how often you say sorry when you haven't actually done anything wrong. Replace it with gratitude or confidence. Instead of, sorry I'm late, try, thank you for waiting. Instead of, sorry if I'm being a bother, say, I appreciate you listening. Helen practiced this consciously. The first few times felt awkward, but soon she noticed a shift, not just in her words, but in how she viewed herself. She realized she didn't need to apologize for existing, for having feelings, or for taking up space. When you stop apologizing for being yourself, you reclaim your voice, your confidence, and your right to be seen and heard exactly as you are. It's a powerful step toward living guilt-free, grounded in the belief that you are enough. Without explanation, without apology. 4. Forgive yourself for past mistakes. Helen often replayed certain memories like a worn-out tape in her mind. Decisions she wished she'd made differently, words she wished she'd spoken, or moments she felt she'd fallen short. The weight of those mistakes clung to her heart, quietly whispering, "You should have known better." But here's the truth. We all carry regrets. It's part of being human. What Helen realized, though, was that holding on to guilt didn't change the past. It only robbed her of the present. Start by writing yourself a letter, not from the critical voice in your head, but from a place of compassion. Acknowledge the mistake, reflect on what you've learned, and then offer forgiveness. It might feel odd at first, but seeing your thoughts on paper helps release the emotional grip. Helen's letter was simple. I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. I forgive myself for not being perfect because perfection isn't real. She didn't magically forget her regrets, but the sharp sting dulled, replaced by a softer understanding. Forgiving yourself doesn't erase the past, but it frees you from being defined by it. It shifts your focus from guilt to growth, allowing you to honor who you were and embrace who you've become. 5. Let go of the need to please everyone. Helen was a people pleaser. She said yes when she wanted to say no, smiled when she felt like crying, and bent over backward to avoid disappointing others, even if it meant disappointing herself. The guilt of letting others down felt unbearable, so she often sacrificed her own needs to keep the peace. But one day, after agreeing to host a family gathering she didn't have the energy for, Helen sat alone in her living room, exhausted and resentful. She realized that pleasing everyone else had come at the cost of her own well-being. Practice saying no without over-explaining. Start small. When someone asks for a favor you're not up for, try this. I'd love to help, but I'm not able to right now. No excuses, no guilt. Your boundaries are valid even if others don't understand. Helen began setting gentle boundaries. At first, it felt uncomfortable, like she was being selfish. But over time, she saw the truth. Saying no to others sometimes meant saying yes to herself, and that was more than okay. Letting go of the need to please everyone brings a sense of freedom. You're no longer living for others' approval, but for your own peace. And the right people will respect you more, not less, for honoring your boundaries. 6. Stop carrying guilt that was never yours to begin with. Helen carried a quiet, invisible burden. Guilt for things that weren't even her fault. Family conflicts she couldn't fix, friendships that drifted apart, situations beyond her control. She'd ask herself, could I have done more? Even when she had done everything she could. This kind of guilt is sneaky because it feels noble, like taking responsibility makes us better people. But in reality, it's like carrying a suitcase full of rocks that were never meant for you to hold. When you feel weighed down by guilt, ask yourself, is this really my responsibility? Imagine physically handing that guilt back to where it belongs. Sometimes saying it out loud helps. This isn't mine to carry. Helen started doing this simple exercise during quiet moments. She'd visualize setting down the burdens that weren't hers, like placing heavy bags on the ground and walking away lighter. It didn't solve every problem, but it helped her separate what she could control from what she couldn't. Releasing guilt that isn't yours frees up emotional space for joy, peace, and clarity. It helps you live more fully, unburdened by the past and rooted in the present. 7. Embrace imperfection. It's part of being human. Helen used to believe that life should be neat and tidy, like a well-folded linen napkin. Everything in its place, mistakes hidden away. She'd look back and cringe at moments where she stumbled, whether it was forgetting an important date, saying the wrong thing, or not living up to her own high expectations. But here's the reality she eventually discovered. Perfection is a myth, and chasing it is exhausting. One afternoon, while baking cookies with her granddaughter, she burned an entire batch. She sighed, ready to spiral into self-blame, but her granddaughter laughed and said, "That's okay, Grandma. Now we get to call them extra crispy cookies." That moment shifted something inside Helen. If a 6-year-old could embrace imperfection with joy, why couldn't she? Start noticing your perfection moments, when you expect yourself to get everything right. Instead of judging, reframe it. Burned dinner? Well, I just invented a new recipe. Forgot something important? I'm human, not a robot. Humor helps, kindness helps more. Helen began to celebrate her imperfections, even finding pride in them. They were proof she was living, learning, and growing. Life's richness isn't found in flawless moments. It's found in the messy, beautiful, imperfect ones. Embracing imperfection frees you from the crushing weight of unrealistic expectations. It allows you to live more authentically, laugh at your mistakes, and love yourself not despite your flaws, but because of them. After all, a life perfectly lived is one fully felt, not flawlessly executed. 8. Say goodbye to regrets about things you can't change. Helen had a habit of replaying old decisions like a movie stuck on repeat. What if I'd chosen a different job? What if I'd spent more time with my parents? The what ifs haunted her, as if thinking about them hard enough could somehow rewrite history. But no matter how many times she revisited the past, nothing changed, except her own peace of mind. One day, she stumbled upon an old letter she'd written but never sent, filled with words she wished she'd said to a friend who'd passed away. Tears welled up, not just from grief, but from regret. That's when it hit her. Regret is like carrying a suitcase full of things you'll never need again, so why hold on? Write a letter to your past self. Pour out everything, the regrets, the guilt, the unspoken words. Then, read it with compassion, as if you were reading it to a dear friend. When you're ready, either keep it as a reminder of your growth, or let it go. Burn it, tear it up, or tuck it away. Helen wrote her letter, and with each word, the weight grew lighter. She realized that regret didn't have to be a life sentence. It was just a feeling, a sign that she cared deeply. But caring doesn't mean clinging. Letting go of regret frees you from living in the shadows of what could be. It shifts your focus to the present, where real change and joy are possible. The past may be written, but today is still yours to create. 9. Stop feeling guilty for setting boundaries. Helen grew up believing that being a good person meant saying yes to favors, yes to visits, yes to anything that made others happy. Even when it left her drained, she'd smile and say, "Of course." But behind that smile was exhaustion, resentment, and a quiet voice whispering, "I need a break." One evening, after hosting yet another event she didn't have the energy for, Helen sat in the silence of her empty house, wondering, why do I feel guilty for taking care of myself? That's when she realized she'd been taught that boundaries were barriers. But in truth, boundaries are bridges to healthier relationships. Practice saying no without guilt. Start with simple phrases. "I'd love to help, but I'm not available. I need some quiet time today." No over-explaining, no apologies. Your time and energy are valuable, and you don't need to justify protecting them. Helen started small, saying no to a lunch date when she needed rest. It felt uncomfortable at first, but with time, she noticed something surprising. The people who truly cared about her respect her boundaries. They didn't love her less. In fact, their respect grew. Setting boundaries without guilt fosters self-respect and emotional well-being. It teaches others how to treat you and creates space for relationships rooted in mutual care, not obligation. Saying no isn't selfish, it's self-love in action. 10. Let go of comparing yourself to others. Helen often found herself caught in quiet comparison. At family gatherings, she'd hear about her friend Margaret's perfectly organized home, or her neighbor Linda's active social life, and a small voice inside whispered, "Why can't I be more like them?" It was subtle, but the feelings lingered, like she was somehow falling short, even when life was perfectly fine. The truth? Comparison is a thief. It steals joy, contentment, and the ability to celebrate your own life. Helen realized she was measuring herself with someone else's ruler, forgetting that her journey was uniquely hers. Start noticing your comparison triggers. When you catch yourself thinking, "I should be more like her," pause. Shift the thought to gratitude. I'm grateful for my own journey with all its twists and turns. Write down 3 things you're proud of, big or small. Helen began a new ritual. Every time she felt the tug of comparison, she'd jot down one thing she genuinely liked about her own life. Some days it was simple. I made the best cup of tea today. Other days it was deeper. I've raised strong, kind children. This small practice recentered her, turning envy into appreciation. Letting go of comparison brings peace. It helps you see your life with fresh eyes, focusing on what's real and meaningful, not what's missing. Your story is yours alone, full of beauty, lessons, and moments no one else can claim. 11. Release the guilt of growing older. Helen never thought she'd feel guilty about aging, but there it was, hidden beneath jokes about forgetting where she left her glasses or needing more rest. She'd catch herself thinking, "I should be able to do more," as if growing older meant she was somehow falling behind. But aging isn't a problem to solve. It's a privilege. Every wrinkle, every laugh line, every gray hair tells a story of survival, growth, and a life fully lived. Helen realized that feeling guilty for aging was like apologizing for being alive. Celebrate your milestones. Instead of dreading birthdays, make them a time to reflect on lessons learned and memories made. Write down things you've gained with age, wisdom, resilience, clarity, and say them out loud like affirmations. Helen started a wisdom journal where she wrote down one thing she'd learned from each decade of her life. She realized how much she'd grown, not despite her age, but because of it. Her perspective shifted from, "I'm getting older," to, "I'm becoming more me." Releasing guilt around aging brings a deep sense of self-acceptance. It helps you embrace the present moment without longing for the past or fearing the future. Aging isn't losing time. It's gaining experience, wisdom, and the freedom to live authentically. 12. Ditch the guilt over wasted time. Helen sometimes found herself reflecting on years she felt she wasted. She'd think, "Why didn't I travel more when I was younger?" Or, "I should have started that hobby sooner." The guilt crept in like a shadow, making her feel as though precious time had slipped through her fingers. But here's the reality. No time is truly wasted. Every moment shapes you, teaches you, and prepares you for what comes next. Even quiet seasons of rest, reflection, or routine are part of your story. One day, Helen stumbled upon an old journal. Flipping through the pages, she realized that even in the years she thought were unproductive, she was growing, navigating challenges, finding strength, and learning about herself. Reframe your past. Instead of labeling time as wasted, ask, what did I learn during that season? Write down lessons, growth, or even simple memories that shaped you. Acknowledge that rest isn't wasted time. It's essential time. Helen created a timeline of growth, mapping out key moments in her life, not just achievements, but personal milestones. Learned to trust my instincts, survived a tough year, and came out stronger. This exercise helped her see that every chapter had value, even the quiet ones. Letting go of guilt over wasted time brings peace and appreciation for your journey. It helps you live fully in the present, knowing that every experience, big or small, contributed to the person you are today. 13. Accept that it's okay to be happy, even when others struggle. Helen often felt a strange guilt whenever she was happy, especially when someone she loved was facing a hard time. She'd catch herself thinking, how can I enjoy this beautiful day when my friend is grieving? It was as if feeling joy was disrespectful to the pain in the world around her. But here's the truth, Helen discovered. Happiness doesn't diminish your empathy. You can hold space for both joy and sorrow at the same time. Your light doesn't cast shadows on others. It can actually help illuminate the path for those still walking through darkness. Give yourself permission to experience joy without guilt. When you feel that tug of hesitation, try this affirmation. My happiness doesn't take away from anyone else's. It's okay for me to feel joy. Helen started noticing the small things. A beautiful sunrise, a delicious cup of tea, a heartfelt laugh with a friend, and instead of pushing the joy away, she embraced it fully. She realized that her happiness didn't mean she didn't care about others. In fact, her joy made her more present and compassionate because she wasn't weighed down by unnecessary guilt. Letting go of guilt around happiness allows you to fully experience life's beautiful moments. It reminds you that joy isn't selfish, it's healing. You deserve to feel light, even when the world feels heavy. 14. Forgive others, not just for them, but for you. Helen carried a few quiet grudges. Old friendships that ended badly, family arguments left unresolved, and moments of betrayal that she couldn't quite shake. She thought holding on to those feelings protected her from being hurt again. But over time, she realized that unforgiveness was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. One day, Helen stumbled upon a quote. Holding on to anger is like holding a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You're the one who gets burned. That hit her hard. Write a forgiveness letter not to send, but for yourself. Pour out all the feelings you've been holding on to. Acknowledge the hurt, but then release it. You're not excusing their behavior. You're choosing to set yourself free. Helen wrote letters to people she hadn't spoken to in years. She didn't send them, but the act of writing helped her process her feelings. She realized forgiveness wasn't about the other person. It was about reclaiming her peace. Forgiveness releases you from the past's grip. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing not to carry the pain any longer. When you forgive, you make space for healing, growth, and peace. 15. Let go of the idea that it's too late for change. Helen used to believe that certain doors were closed forever. Dreams she never pursued, changes she never made, adventures she thought were behind her. I'm too old for that, she'd tell herself. Whether it was learning a new skill, making new friends, or trying something bold. But one day she met a woman in her 80s who had just started painting, and her artwork was breathtaking. When Helen asked if she'd always been an artist, the woman laughed and said, "Oh no, I picked up a brush for the first time last year." That moment shattered Helen's belief that life had an expiration date for growth. Write down one thing you've always wanted to do but thought it was too late for. It could be small: learning to play an instrument, joining a book club, traveling somewhere new. Take one small step toward it today. Sign up for a class, call a friend, or simply say out loud, "I can still do this." Helen decided to learn how to play the piano, something she'd dreamed about as a child but never pursued. At first, she fumbled with the keys, feeling awkward and unsure. But with each note, she felt alive, proving to herself that it's never too late to try something new. Letting go of the too late mindset opens your life to endless possibilities. It reminds you that as long as you're breathing, you're growing. Life doesn't stop offering new chapters. You just have to turn the page. Who knew letting go of guilt could feel like dropping a bag of rocks you didn't even realize you were carrying? Helen did it, and so can you. Life after 70 isn't about regrets. It's about refreshments. So what guilt are you kicking to the curb today? Share below. We're cheering you on.